I ran a game of Daggerheart with my friends and did my best to follow the GM advice to the letter, including running a fully emergent game where we built the world and narrative together as a group. Plus, we built characters. There's a lot to love about the open beta, and I really did enjoy the game, but it isn't perfect. Some of the mechanics don't quite hit home yet, some extra balancing wouldn't go amiss, and some of the rules could do with clarifications. In this video I'll discuss some of these issues and some potential fixes for them. As the game's currently in beta, this is the best chance to fix them, so let's jump in. In Daggerheart, players will almost always start with initiative. As soon as combat starts, the GM is asked to bring the action tracker out. For every action a player makes, an action token will be added to the tracker. Every action made by adversaries will cost the GM an action token. This is pretty neat if you don't mind counting tokens constantly, and playing with your tokens as a GM is a nice way to build tension. I love the physical touch and intimidating players with poker chips, so I'm game. The flow of combat is like this. Players start with initiative, and every time there's a player turn, the players have to decide among themselves who gets to take the turn. When any player rolls a failure or rolls with fear, which should be pretty often statistically, the GM gets to make a move and activate adversaries using accrued action tokens, but they can generally only activate each adversary once before they give back initiative to the players for another round of "Can I have my turn please?" The players, however, have no such restrictions. If they agree, one player could take all of the actions while none of the other players take any. This system, and the way it interacts with some other game mechanics, causes a few issues. The first and most obvious, and which everyone seems to be talking about, is the chaos that could ensue from players arguing about who gets to take their turn next. Most people are thinking about adults here, but I take a wider view. I feel that a good way to test a game mechanic is to try it out in the most challenging environment. If it works smoothly there, then it should work smoothly in every environment. Can you imagine playing Daggerheart with a group of 10-year-olds and asking who wants to take their turn first? In this context, I expect that this fluid initiative system will cause unnecessary tension between the players, and often get in the way of making sure that everyone shares the spotlight, which is very rightly one of Daggerheart's pieces of GM advice on running a game. With the system as it is, a shyer player may forego taking their first turn while another player takes their second or third turn. Not because they don't want to take their turn, but because they don't feel comfortable speaking out. And it isn't limited to just arguments either. While the players in my game were adults and friends, and they weren't arguing about who got to take their turn, I did notice a tinge of unhappiness a few times when someone who wanted to take their turn next didn't get to. Some other elements of the game and the way that they interact with the initiative system also conflict with sharing the spotlight and don't make much sense. In a TTRPG, many players will want to make the optimal move, and in some cases, Daggerheart's initiative system means that the optimal move is thematically nonsensical. One player in the game that I ran made and played a fairy. He picked the race because they can fly to increase their evasion score, making them harder to hit until they next roll with fear. Every action roll has a 44% chance of rolling with fear. In a situation where you're flying, surrounded by melee enemies, not wanting to get hit, and your allies are around to help thin the herd, the optimal action might be to take no action at all and let your allies deal with your would-be attackers. This will mean that you're guaranteed to keep your evasion boost up and be less likely to be hit. This makes no sense thematically, as an adventurer surrounded by enemies would likely be very busy trying to fend them off. This isn't an isolated case either. Players can find themselves in a similar position if their adversary is immune to their weapons or abilities, but can be hurt by an ally. In this case, it's optimal for a player to give up their turn and let their ally do something useful instead, to avoid giving the GM an action token. We wouldn't expect this to be uncommon either, as there is an enemy that's immune to physical damage even in the starting adventure that comes with the playtest. The way initiative is decided also means that time has no meaning in Daggerheart combat. As one character can take 3 turns in a row, we either have to imagine that that character is much faster than the others, or that the other characters are just twiddling their thumbs while the combat unfolds. This is a minor point, but it may affect the sense of immersion for some players. The initiative system and movement mechanics can also make melee enemies pretty boring in the first GM move. While you can move from close distance to melee range as part of another action such as making an attack, moving from far or very far to melee range requires an action token of its own. This means that if the players are battling a lot of melee enemies, then the first GM move might be to just move some melee enemies into range to attack on a later turn. I ran into this problem in the game I ran as I had my group of 3 players encounter a group of 3 direwolves that were attacking a travelling merchant. Part of my first GM move was just to move the wolves, which didn't really add much to the tension. Of course, this isn't just a problem in Daggerheart, but it would be really nice if it could be addressed. If Daggerheart wants to keep fluid initiative as the recommended initiative mechanic, that's fine. I think in most cases when playing with adults and experienced gamers it will probably run okay, but at the very least I'd like the rulebook to acknowledge some of these potential issues and identify some alternatives that could resolve them. A slightly modified system where every player needs to take a turn before any player can take a second would fix most of these issues, so that would be a good start. I love the thought that has gone into the weapons in Daggerheart and making them interesting. There's a really nice range of starting weapons that are tied to different traits, not just strength and agility, Daggerheart's counterpart to dexterity, and many have interesting features such as affecting trait values. However, some of the weapons could do with some extra thought on balancing and a sense check, and I'd like to see some common weapons that are missing introduced to the game. In the playtest, short swords and long swords both use the agility trait and have a melee range. Short swords deal d10 damage and take 1 hand to use. Long swords only deal d8 damage, take 2 hands to use, and give you a +1 on your attack rolls. Attack bonuses may be hard to come by, but it seems like a hard price to pay as you get less damage and you're not able to use a shield or second weapon. Offhand weapons in the playtest add a flat +2 to damage, so this makes the damage differential even worse. You'd be looking at d8 damage for a long sword versus d10 +2 for 2 short swords. I think most people would agree that it doesn't make much sense for a longsword to deal less damage than a short sword, so I'd reassess these numbers. I'd also like to see more thrown weapons, and particularly strength-based ones. In the playtest, strength weapons all have a range of melee apart from the halberd, which can also hit it very close. Thrown weapons are really common in TTRPGs, and it would be nice to have a bit more variety. Daggerheart's playtest manuscript is pretty thorough and it's impressive, coming in at almost 400 pages, but there are some things that could do with extra clarification. I couldn't find any rules on speaking in combat and what's allowed on a turn. I feel this is important. As a player, I try to maintain a separation between what I know about the game and what my character knows, so I can improve the sense of immersion and not break the fourth wall. To support this, it's important that characters can speak to each other in combat to point out enemies and discuss tactics. I feel it should be codified what should typically be allowed here, especially as the initiative system kind of breaks the sense of time in the game. Can players talk when it isn't their turn and they're not using an action token? Roughly how long does each turn last and how much can you speak during it? This may be a minor point, but I think it would improve the game for some people, so I'd prefer if it were in the final version. In Daggerheart, proficiency determines how many damage dice you roll. I'd like a clarification as to whether higher proficiency also multiplies flat damage bonuses like those you get from the battle axe or from dual wielding. I assume it's not intended to, but players might want to know this when they're making their character and choosing a weapon and playstyle. I know I might think twice about making a dual wielding character if I can expect the damage bonus from dual wielding to become negligible at higher levels. Anyway, they're just my thoughts on what can be improved in the Daggerheart playtest. What are yours? Don't let this video fool you. I had a really great time playing Daggerheart and I'm looking forward to the full release. I loved a lot of things about the game and I'll make a video about that which will go here when it's ready. If you enjoyed this video, help me out by clicking those buttons, and until next time, happy adventuring.